There was a small town tucked near the edges of Tennessee, the kind where the roads were narrow and so were most people's hearts. Folks here were plain-spoken, hard-edged, and used to denying the truth until it hit them like a slap. And in this town, a girl was born. Her name was Amy. Amy was just 2 when people noticed she walked differently. Her left foot turned slightly inward, and her right leg hesitated with every step. Like something between her legs had fractured in spirit, like her walk carried the fatigue of a battle no one else could see. But in her home, that wasn't seen as an illness. It was called defiance. "She's faking it," her father, Tom Hudson, would snap, his voice sharp with anger. Tom worked in a factory, swallowed up day and night by the roar of machines, growing numb to the world and hollow on the inside. He never stopped to ask why his daughter cried, why she limped with every step. In his mind, everything was about discipline, and Amy's walk was a violation of that order. Her mother, Martha, was a quiet woman. Too quiet. Her silence clung to her like armor, as if swallowing every thought was the only power she had left. She'd see Amy stumble into walls, collapse to the floor, knees scraped and bleeding. But she stayed silent. Sometimes there was fear in her eyes, but her lips always said the same thing. "Your dad will get angry." Even the women in the neighborhood whispered their jabs. Amy walks like a drunk. Once at school, a boy called her Cricket, and the whole class burst out laughing. That day, Amy came home and asked, "Mom, why do I walk like this?" Martha didn't answer. She just stared out the window and muttered, "Maybe you're not paying attention." And that's when it began. The idea that Amy wasn't just different, but wrong. That her body was betraying her. Every day she was told to walk properly. Tom would beat her with a belt, shove her into walls. "Walk straight. You're embarrassing us in front of people." One day, Amy tried. She tied her ankles together with a rope, hoping to make her feet move in sync. Her foot turned blue, swollen. No one asked why. That was her childhood. Walking into school every morning, hearing laughter behind her back, and crying at night into a pillow, bathroom door locked. When she turned 8, her school held sports day. Kids were running, jumping, but Amy couldn't even stand upright. She turned, took one step, and fell. The field echoed with clapping and cruel laughter. That's when her teacher, Miss Clark, walked over. She bent down, looked at Amy's legs carefully, and then asked softly, "Does it hurt when you walk?" Amy was quiet. Then she whispered, "No, I just can't walk right." Miss Clark said nothing. She walked straight to the principal's office. And from that moment, everything changed. Amy's parents were called in. Tom showed up fuming. "Now this kid's pulling stunts at school too?" Miss Clark spoke calmly. "Your daughter needs to see a doctor. There might be a medical reason for her walk. She's not doing this on purpose." Tom laughed in her face. "A doctor? There's nothing wrong with her. This is all her mother's doing, is spoiling her since birth." Miss Clark didn't flinch. "If you won't take her, I will, and I'll be notifying child protection too." For the first time, Tom fell silent. That night, he barked at Martha. "Take her to the doctor. Let's see what this so-called sickness is." The next week, Amy was taken out of town to see an orthopedic specialist. They took X-rays. The doctor stared at the image and froze. "This child, she has congenital hip dysplasia," he said. "Her hip joints didn't develop properly. That's why she walks the way she does." Tom said nothing. Not out of guilt, just shock. "If she'd gotten help earlier," the doctor added, "she'd be in much better shape now. But we'll need to start therapy, braces, maybe even surgery." On the ride back, Tom didn't speak. He didn't pull the car over once. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, not because of what the doctor said, but because he couldn't handle the weight of being wrong. That night, for the first time, Martha gently touched Amy's feet, like a mother waking up years too late. But Amy knew better now. Hands that once pulled away in silence can't rebuild trust just by holding on later. She had finally understood. The problem wasn't in her walk. It was in how the world chose to see her. And that's where her real journey began, on the same path that once brought her shame. The doctor's report didn't change the world. But something inside Amy shifted forever. She finally understood. What was happening to her wasn't her fault, and it had never been about seeking attention. But knowing that wasn't enough. Her home hadn't changed. Her town hadn't changed. And her father's temper was still the same. The treatment began. Every morning, steel braces were strapped tightly around Amy's legs. So tight, she'd forget what her own skin felt like. Walking in those braces felt like stepping into a battlefield. Every step became a mission. But the kids at school didn't change. In fact, they found new material. Now she was the metal girl. Some would bang on her braces like drums and laugh. Others mimicked her walk, putting on exaggerated shows for the class. One kid even asked, "Are you a robot or what?" Amy didn't respond. She had learned silence could be the loudest answer, especially when everyone else was too busy making noise. But something else was growing inside her. A new kind of walk. Not a real one, but one that looked controlled. The kind that made others laugh with her, not at her. She started owning the joke. "Look," she'd say, "I walk like the moon dances." And for a moment, the kids would go quiet, unsure if she was serious or brilliant. But at night, when the braces came off, her legs would scream. Burning, tingling, 1,000 invisible needles racing through her veins. She'd bury her face into the pillow and whisper to herself, "Will this ever end?" Then one day, the school started a drama class. The teacher said, "Everyone show your walking style." Kids got silly. One marched like a soldier, another strutted like a fashion model. Amy stayed seated, her eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Clark asked, "Amy, would you like to try?" She stood up, slowly, carefully. Some kids smiled, already preparing to laugh. But Amy did something different. She took the walk she'd crafted in silence, the one she wore like armor, and turned it into art. She moved across the stage like a painting in motion, each step a brushstroke. Her braces didn't slow her. They danced with her. The room fell silent. And for the first time, someone said her walk was beautiful. That evening, she didn't say a word at home. But later, as Martha was rubbing her legs, Amy whispered, "Mom, do I look different?" Martha paused, surprised, then said gently, "Yes, but maybe that's what makes you special." That was the first night Amy looked in the mirror and smiled. But happiness never stayed for long. During recess, one of her brace straps snapped. She fell, flat on her back, her head hitting the steps. Blood poured from her nose, but Amy stood up, wiped the blood with her sleeve, and said, "I don't need a doctor. I know how to walk." There was no hate in her voice, only fire. A stubborn fire that now burned like purpose. Back home, Tom still called her worthless. One night, exhausted from school, Amy dropped her bag and collapsed onto the bed. Tom sneered, "When's this act going to end?" For the first time, Martha answered, "The doctor said it's a real condition. Why can't you accept it?" Tom didn't reply. But that silence didn't carry love. It carried defeat. And Tom didn't know how to lose. Then came career day at school. Each child was asked what they wanted to be when they grew up. A doctor, a firefighter, a teacher. When it was Amy's turn, they asked, "And what about you?" She replied without hesitation, "I want people to walk like me, without fear." The teacher smiled. "And what would your name be then?" Amy said, "I'll still be me, but the world will finally see the soul in my walk." That evening, she made herself a promise. No more fake walks, no more performances. From now on, she would walk as she was. Whether the world changed or not, she wouldn't lose her rhythm. Childhood was fading, and Amy was growing. And in that quiet, defiant turn, she turned her weakness into the greatest strength of her soul. Time moved forward. School passed, then college, and then that stage of life where people stop asking questions and start offering hands for marriage. Amy had grown up. There was still a slight jolt in her walk, but it had become a part of her now, like the rhythm of her soul. It was in college that she met Tyler. Tyler, quiet, thoughtful, and someone who carried more inside him than he ever let on. He didn't see Amy's walk. He saw her eyes, eyes that held a whole world, where every smile was born after a battle. Their early encounters were casual, behind books in the library, clumsily bumping into each other in the campus coffee shop, or running under the same umbrella during a sudden downpour. Tyler never stared at her feet, never asked why she walked the way she did. And Amy, for the first time, felt normal in someone's gaze. 2 years later, Tyler proposed, not on one knee, but by looking straight into her eyes. Amy said yes, but somewhere deep inside, a familiar fear stirred again. What if he changes like the others? What if one day he tells me I need to be fixed? On their wedding day, as Amy walked down the church aisle in her white gown, someone, an older relative, whispered behind her, "Look at the bride's walk, like there's a nail in her foot." Tyler heard it. He turned around, walked up, opened his arms, and hugged Amy tightly. Right there, in front of everyone. There was no explanation in that hug, just respect, like he was silently saying, "You are complete, exactly as you are." They got married. A small house, some old furniture, and one blue wall that Amy had picked out. That's where their new life began. The first few months were good. Tyler was still the same, caring but never invasive. But slowly, the pain in Amy's legs returned. This time it was different. The numbness reached deeper, and every night, her ankles burned like fire. One night, Amy screamed, not in a dream, but in real pain. She was sitting on the floor, clutching her feet, crying uncontrollably. Tyler woke up, rushed over, and asked, "What happened? Did you hurt yourself?" And for the first time, Amy told him everything she'd buried for years. "My legs, they won't lift anymore, Tyler. They burn, like someone stabbing needles from the inside." Tyler didn't speak. He just sat with her, placed her foot gently in his lap, and kept rubbing it for hours. But Amy knew. This wasn't just pain now. This was fear. If this got worse, would she even be able to walk? The next day, they decided to see the doctor. This time, the doctor ordered an MRI. When the results came in, he didn't speak right away. He stood by the window, silent, as if gathering the right words. "Amy," he said finally, "your bones have now shifted under chronic stress. This congenital condition has slowly progressed. And now it's impacting your nervous system. If you don't get surgery soon, a wheelchair may be your only option." The room filled with heavy silence. Tyler held Amy's hand, but worry crept into the lines on his own forehead. The urgency in the doctor's voice was clear. And Amy understood. Time was not on her side. On the drive home, Amy stared out the car window. She thought of her childhood. Tom's belt, the laughter of classmates, the little girl crying in the bathroom. And now, that same girl was standing at the edge of another battle. Tyler asked softly, "Are you ready?" Amy replied, "I need to ask myself something first, before I answer anyone else." That night, Amy couldn't sleep. Not from the pain, from the questions. Would getting surgery mean those people were right? The ones who said she was broken? Would agreeing to be fixed mean her body had always been a mistake? She got out of bed, walked to her desk, and pulled out an old notebook, the one she'd written in during school. On the cover it read, "I will walk as I am, no matter what the world says." She opened it, took a pen, and underneath that line she wrote, "But if I can't walk like this anymore, does that mean I've lost?" Tyler woke up. He saw her and said quietly, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But it has to be your choice, not the doctor's, not anyone else's." That night, Amy made her decision. She would get the surgery. But she wouldn't tell her family, because she didn't need their support. She had learned long ago how to fight alone. The surgery had been a success. The team of doctors had done their job. But the hardest operation had only just begun, the one on her soul. The wounds in her body had been cut, fixed, and stitched. But the wounds buried deep inside, those couldn't be seen on any scan, and no ointment could heal them. Amy was now in the hospital's recovery wing, a quiet corner where sunlight crept slowly across the floor, as if even time itself wanted to pause with her. She was now able to take a few steps with a walker. Every morning brought physical therapy. Nurses came and went. Tyler held her hand through it all. But there was one thing Tyler still didn't understand: that Amy wasn't just fighting pain anymore. She was battling her identity. One night, while the whole room was asleep and the window curtain shifted gently with the breeze, Amy lay awake. In her hands was an old diary, the same one where she had hidden her most private truths as a child. On its worn pages were faded words. "I want to stay as I am." Now she wondered, did choosing surgery mean I admitted I was built wrong? Did I do exactly what the world always wanted me to? Fix myself? Did my old self just die on that operating table? Her mind wrestled with itself. One voice whispered, "You won. You're free from the pain." Another hissed, "You lost. You gave in. You became what they said you should." The next morning, when the physical therapist asked, "How far would you like to walk today?" Amy didn't answer. Her eyes stared off into a question that had no words. Tyler sat nearby, but for the first time, his grip around her hand felt loose. That day, Amy didn't speak to anyone. Not to the doctor, not to the nurse, not even to Tyler. By evening, she wheeled herself out to the hospital balcony, alone, where the city stretched out beneath her. The same city that had never really seen her. And now, the city where she would return, walking with a new rhythm. "Am I still the same me?" she asked herself. As if in reply, a child ran across the courtyard below. There was something off about his steps. A jolt, a slight limp. His mother ran after him, shouting angrily, "Walk straight! People will laugh!" Amy's eyes filled with tears. She was looking at herself. That night, she pulled out a blank letter and began to write. Not to anyone else, just to herself. "Dear Amy, you had the surgery, not to surrender, but to be free. You didn't bow down. You chose to keep fighting. This isn't your defeat. This is your next chapter. The walk that once carried pain now carries peace. And remember, the girl you were wasn't wrong. And the woman you are now, she isn't either. The difference is, now you get to choose. And that right is yours, with love, the Amy who still understands you." That night, for the first time since the surgery, Amy slept deeply. The pain was still there, but gentler, like her body and soul had finally reached an understanding. The next morning, she turned to Tyler and said, I'm okay, but I don't need to prove anything anymore. Tyler smiled and replied, You never had to. But one thing was now certain. Amy wouldn't go back to her parents. She wouldn't call, wouldn't explain what happened or how, because this had been her battle and her victory. She no longer needed their approval or their permission. She owed everything only to herself, and for the first time, she was honest with her own heart. The day of discharge finally arrived. After 4 weeks of surgical recovery, every morning's physical therapy, and countless painful but necessary efforts, Amy was now ready for a new beginning. She was ready. But this time, not to prove anything to anyone, just to feel herself. As she walked down the hospital steps for the first time, she didn't think about her gait. There were no braces, no belts, and no staring eyes. Just Tyler beside her, and a new hope quietly beating inside her. The moment she sat in the car, she looked out the window. The same Boston buildings, the same roads, the same hum of rushing traffic. But Amy wasn't looking for a destination anymore. She was searching for a quiet peace inside herself. When they reached home, Tyler scooped her up and carried her across the door, just like he had on their wedding day. Amy laughed and said, I can walk now. I know, Tyler smiled, but I still had to do this. The house was small. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a window where morning sunlight always poured in. But today, it didn't feel small. It felt like a palace, because for the first time, Amy had entered it on her own terms. On the very first day, Amy rearranged the furniture, cleared the walking space, created a corner, with her reading chair, a few plants, and on the table, that same diary, ready for new pages. Tyler returned to work. But this time, Amy wasn't alone. With her was her new walk, slow, steady, and becoming more natural each day. 3 days later, she stepped outside for the first time, without support. Her walk still had a slight imbalance, but now it wasn't filled with pain. It was filled with confidence. In the park, a few people glanced at her, but there were no whispers, no snide remarks. Instead, an elderly woman came up to her and said, You walk with such a beautiful grace. Amy smiled. Then one evening she told Tyler, I want to tell my mom, not out of expectation, not anger, just to tell her that I'm alive, and I'm walking now. Tyler was quiet for a moment, then nodded. She picked up the phone. Her mother's number was still saved, but it was gray. No call, no message for 3 months. It rang. Once, twice. On the 5th ring, someone picked up. Hello? Her mother's voice was the same, fragile but not hesitant. Mom. Amy's voice trembled. It's me, Amy. There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of a heavy breath. I knew, one day you'd call. I had surgery, Mom, Amy said. I can walk now, without pain. Her mother's voice cracked. Really? Oh, Amy, I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? Amy was calm. She said, Because I didn't need your belief. I was fighting with myself, and I won. Her mother began to cry, but there was regret in those tears, not love. I want to see you, if you'll let me. Amy stayed silent for a few seconds, then said, Someday, but not now. I need to understand myself a little more, without the smoke from the past. As she ended the call, 2 tears fell from Amy's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were light and clear. That same night, she made a post on her social media. For the first time, using her real name and her real voice. My name is Amy Hudson. People laughed at my walk, called me a liar, said my illness was just an act. I wore braces for years, endured pain, stayed silent. But now, I walk on my own feet, without pain, without shame, without fear. I don't want revenge. I have nothing left to prove. I'm just living. And for the first time, it feels like I own my life. And all of this is because of me. Only me. The post went viral overnight. By morning, Amy had over 100 messages. Someone said, "You just told my sister's story." Someone else wrote, "I'm fighting the same battle." And one simply said, "Thank you. You gave me a reason to live." Amy was no longer alone. Her walk was no longer just her private struggle. It was becoming a movement. That Facebook post changed the map of Amy's life. Overnight, a quiet, nameless woman became the voice of millions. Her post was shared across autism and orthopedic support groups, women's empowerment pages, and medical awareness organizations all over America. Messages flooded in, from mothers and daughters, from old friends, even from a few childhood classmates, the same ones who once mocked the way she walked. But the message that stung the most came from her mother, Martha. "I read your post. Every word keeps me awake. Maybe now I understand that my silence was a crime, too. I just didn't know how to be a mother. Can forgiveness ever be possible?" Amy saw the message, but didn't reply. Forgiveness needs a space in the heart where pain has already settled. But inside her soul, something still remained, like an old wound with a faint, lingering burn. Tyler asked, "Will you talk to her?" Amy shook her head. "Words. Sometimes they hurt more when they come late. I can hear my mother now. But back when I needed her voice the most, she was silent." Meanwhile, Martha kept calling, leaving voicemails. "I just want to see how you're doing. I know I did everything wrong, but will you give me a little time?" In the middle of all this, a female reporter reached out to Amy. She wanted to interview her for a popular podcast. Tyler felt nervous, but Amy didn't hesitate anymore. During the interview, she told her story without drama, how walking had become a punishment in childhood, how she endured even the diagnosis in silence, and how she stood up again on her own terms. But when the reporter asked, "Have you forgiven your mother?" Amy paused for a moment. Forgiveness isn't a gift. It comes when the heart wants to free itself. "I'm trying." After the interview, she received another message from her mother, this time with a photo. It was an old picture of little Amy crying after a fall, while Martha stood at a distance, watching. Below it was just one line. "I wish I had picked you up that day." Amy stared at the photo for a long time. Her eyes welled up, but there was no pity in them, just a deep, exhausted acceptance. That night, when Tyler came home, he saw Amy writing something. It was a letter. To her mother. "Your words came too late, Mom. When I was on the floor, you became a wall. When I was fighting the world, you shut your eyes. But now that I'm standing, walking, breathing freely, I want you to know, you made me. Your silence taught me how to speak louder. Your coldness taught me how to embrace others. And maybe that's the greatest forgiveness life has to offer. I'm no longer your daughter. I am my own woman. I am forgiving myself, not you." She didn't post that letter. She folded it, placed it in a mason jar, and locked it in the bottom drawer of her reading table. The next day, Tyler asked, "What will you do now?" Amy smiled and said, "What I do best? Walk, move forward, and become the voice I once wished I had." Amy was no longer just a name. She had become a symbol, an identity, a story of resilience. But real change happens when your fight becomes someone else's shield. Months passed. From social media to local radio stations, Amy's story reached further than she ever imagined. Her post had quietly transformed into a movement. Walk with dignity. A campaign for those whose walk the world had turned into a spectacle. Because of that campaign, Amy was invited to a small community health center, a space for young people recovering from both mental and physical trauma. That's where she met Joseph. Joseph, a 19-year-old boy who rarely spoke and avoided every eye that met his. He carried fear in his shoulders, like something was always chasing him. His walk was perfectly straight, but his soul was shattered. The center's director told Amy, Joseph ran away from an abusive father. 2 years of physical and emotional abuse. Now he doesn't trust anyone. He hasn't spoken a single word. Amy didn't ask him anything. She just sat beside him and said, I didn't speak for years either. Because words often gave people reasons to hurt me. But one day, someone sat next to me. Didn't ask, didn't judge. Just sat. And I thought, maybe it's time to talk. Joseph said nothing, but his hands moved slightly. For the first time, someone had given him the chance to be silent without being invisible. The next week, Amy returned to the center, this time pushing a wheelchair. Joseph stared at her in surprise. Sit, Amy said. I can walk, Joseph replied, for the first time. So can I, Amy smiled. But this chair once gave me strength. Sometimes we need to revisit the things that saved us. They went to the park. Amy walked beside him, and Joseph pushed the wheelchair. No words, just a silence that spoke louder than conversation. Within days, Joseph told Amy the story of his childhood, how his father called him weak, how he never owned a toy, how every night felt like surviving a war. Amy said nothing. But one day, she prepared a room for him, in their own apartment. Tyler asked, Is he going to live with us? Amy said, No. We're going to live with him, because Joseph isn't learning how to live in a house. He's learning how to live in trust. Tyler smiled. You want to fix everything that's broken, don't you? No, Amy said. I just want to be the person I once needed. Now there were 3 people in the house, 3 coffee mugs on the table, 3 books on the sofa, and a new sign on the wall that read, However we walk, that's our story. Let the world keep watching. But the story didn't end there. Joseph is now in college, studying social work. He won a court case against his father. And today, he leads group sessions for young survivors like himself. Amy? She's now the founder of Walk with Dignity. Every year, her organization helps hundreds of children receive medical care, surgical funding, and emotional therapy. And Tyler? He still makes coffee every morning, not with Amy, but for Amy. And one evening, when Amy reached the last page of her old diary, she wrote, My walk doesn't fear me anymore. I don't owe anyone an explanation. I don't stop. Because I didn't learn how to walk. I taught myself. And she smiled. Then closed the diary. Friends, if you like the video, then please like and subscribe to the channel.